Welcome, everyone, to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted to welcome Maria Smirnova, and we are going to talk about Christopher Alexander and Maria Montessori, living architecture with living pedagogy. So I'll introduce Maria. She started off with background in finance. Math was one of her favorite subjects growing up, and she was in the business world. She has an international business degree. But when she had her children, she asked the question, what do I need to do for my children? How do I bring them up? And she discovered Montessori. And similarly, she also discovered Christopher Alexander's work. And she was able to put the two together with Maria Montessori's idea of the living pedagogy and Christopher Alexander's idea of living architecture. And today she's going to talk to us about what those two philosophies look like. What are the elements of the two philosophies? And she's going to show us some examples of the work of Christopher Alexander in Montessori environments. So I'm very excited about that, Maria, and welcome.
Thank you, Rupali, and hello everyone, and thank you for your time today. So as Rupali mentioned, I have been working in a Montessori for many years now. So I definitely consider myself more pedagogue than an architect, and the architecture has been in my life more in the past 3 years. But when I came across Christopher Alexander readings a few years ago, I was struck by all the different similarities in a bigger cosmic vision that both of them, Maria Montessori and Christopher Alexander, have, and also the magnitude of their personalities, that they can, like the richness of their writings. They both of them wrote many books, and also the admiration in a way of how they can talk with the same ease about mathematics, psychology, anthropology, biology, quantum physics, and you name it. So it's really, to me, the two amazing personalities that contributed so much to the development of pedagogy and education on one end, and also architecture on the other end. So I will share a presentation.
Sure. So I just wanted to read one passage from Louis Sullivan's book called Kindergarten Chats. And this passage will set the tone for what we are going to see, because both Maria Montessori and Christopher Alexander talk about the nature of human beings. Maria Montessori she called them human tendencies. And she said, if you teach a child according to the human tendencies, then you're going to allow this child to become a fully realized human being, a potential human being that can carry out great works in the world. And Christopher Alexander talks about the nature of human beings and how it relates to architecture and space. So, what are these human tendencies? Louis Sullivan says, Louis Sullivan calls them man's powers. He says, man's powers or human tendencies mean simply what man can do. Therefore, let us now see what man can do. What are his powers? He splits them into physical powers and mental powers. As to the physical nature, man has the power of locomotion, of muscular control, the power to select and manipulate other things, other objects, to surmount obstacles. Therefore, is he by nature a wanderer, a toiler, a worker, an artisan, an artist? For these things mean the power to create. As to his mental nature, man has the urging power of curiosity. He wishes to know the how. Hence is his power to do increased by his knowledge how to do. His art is strengthened and amplified by his power of science, to discern the why. Still a wanderer, a seeker, a worker, a thinker, he pushes his power of inquiry into new paths. He becomes a philosopher. His thus acquired knowledge of why increases his power over the how, and hence his power to do, which means a progressive, culminating power growth in solidarity. His philosophy, his science, his art mutually strengthening each other. Thus, the man, the worker, the inquirer, the thinker, becomes ever more unitary in the exercise of his powers. He becomes the great worker. But the man has the power of feeling, of emotion, his great powers of his inner life. Hence, the man is the poet. And the man has the power to vision forth. Hence, he is a dreamer of dreams, spectator of visions, the prophet. His emotions and his dreams, his visions and his forecasts vitalize his thinking, his speculations and his work. They charge his creation with the current of life, and so man rises in accomplished power. He ever pushes back the frontiers, he ever intensifies the near and the far. And man is a spirit, hence his emotion, his intellectual, his physical need to find union with spirit. And man is a moral being, a power of enormous momentum. It is the power to choose. And thus, in his growth, his unfolding, his self centralization, man the worker becomes man the creator. So, these are the human tendencies that Maria Montessori talks about. And Christopher Alexander takes this nature of human beings to say, how can we design spaces? He's talked about spaces throughout history, ever since humans have started creating structures for themselves. And they didn't go to architecture schools, but they created these living spaces. So, Maria, on to you.
Thank you, everybody. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will start from Maria Montessori, a little bit in the order of how I also came to know them, and also how my thinking evolved and what I could do also in my work to combine those two great ideas and principles together. A little bit of short history about Maria Montessori and where she came from in terms of her pedagogical work. So she was born in Italy in 1870 in Caravale. And after her compulsory schooling and against the will of her father, she actually enrolled in a technical school. And then at the age of 26, she became a third female physician doctor in Italy, and she graduated from the university in Rome. And Maria Montessori had a very strong intuition and also very, I would say, scientific mind, very observant mind. Once she was walking home from her university and she saw a beggar in the street, and this beggar had a 2-year-old child. And while the beggar was asking for help, Maria Montessori was actually focused on watching the little baby who was playing with the threads of the scarf of his mom, completely absorbed. Nothing was going on around. And so Maria Montessori continued her observations and research, focusing on the child's mind. She began working at San Giovanni Hospital in Rome, where she was really distinguished by her holistic approach. And what clinical observations of Maria Montessori brought was the idea that actually the children that were there considered to be sick and underdeveloped or retarded, they were not actually maybe so much sick, but they were understimulated, they were treated as useless, they didn't have enough care, both mental or physical care, to be treated as actually human beings. And so she noticed that they were, for example, picking up breadcrumbs from the floor, because it was the only thing in the room that they could manipulate. There was absolutely nothing available to them. And so she decided to delve deeper into this topic and study if there were any other works that were already done for children in this situation. And she went to the work of Edouard Sigan and Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard. And so these were two French doctors who did work with children who had different developmental particularities. And so Sigan and Itard, they believed that the children that had these difficulties, they were actually more in need of education rather than therapy. And teaching a child to, for example, dress himself or prepare a meal or do something that is serving him and the community is actually going to bring a lot of positive aspects to his development. And so Sigan designed exercises that were stimulating both motor and cognitive development through different practical life activities. So the activities from everyday objects in everyday life. And I can also quote Sigan: "We must move from the education of movement to the education of the senses, and then from the education of the senses to concepts, and then from concepts to ideas, and finally from ideas to moral value." Oops. So in 1898, there was a first pedagogical congress in Torino, where Maria Montessori could explain some of her ideas and observations. And she was saying that for years I have been studying how to help these children reintegrate the society, gain their place and independence in the world, and thus regain their dignity as human beings. And what was really remarkable at this time is that she, with her approach, so by involving some of the works of Sigan and Itard, using some of the materials that they already at that time developed, she actually managed to prepare those children who were completely considered useless, retarded, like completely no chance for them to be members of the society. She managed to train them in a way to pass the compulsory examination that happens at the age of 10. And so that brought even more questions to Maria Montessori, especially with regards to what happens in the normal schools. What happens with the children who don't have any developmental challenges and who, let's say, don't pass the exams, who cannot make it. And so she wrote in her book that was called the Scientific Pedagogy in 1909, while assisting my patients, I wondered what was happening in schools with children defined as normal. She also was a director of the speech therapy department, and she could use also Sigan material to see how it can actually help develop the human potential of the child. And that became one of her main themes, that a certain way of education, a certain approach can actually be a complete breakthrough for children and their development. And so what happens later is that in 1907, there was a first children's house that is opened in Rome. So it was called Casa dei Bambini, an Italian children's house. And the mayor of Rome at that time, he decided to basically entrust to Maria Montessori the children of the poor workers of the very poor neighborhood of Rome in San Lorenzo. So these children were almost delinquents running in the street. Nobody was taking care of them. And so there was this idea at that time to rejuvenate some neighborhoods, to bring change, not only through physical conditions, but also more holistic way of taking care of people. And so the choice of the person who could carry on such an ambitious project was fell on Maria Montessori, who accepted the challenge. And very quickly, this place became really the mecca of education, with a lot of people around the world coming to see what Maria Montessori was doing there. Although for her, it was pretty much the first experience with children who were considered as children of normal development, but of poor, let's say, social strata of society. And then she was really observing children, looking at what is working, what is not working. So it was a purely scientific approach to pedagogy. She didn't have a preconceived idea what should be taught to the children, when should be taught. It was pure observation of a scientific mind. And so the main observations of Maria Montessori at San Lorenzo were basically two key things. The first is the polarization of the child's attention and concentration in activities. So I think even today, many of us believe that young children are not able to concentrate, or their concentration span is very short. You need to constantly get them occupied with something. So she saw that it was not true. She could see that providing certain conditions were united, children were capable of concentrating for a very long time, as young as 3 to 6 years old. And she also observed that children have sensitive periods in their development, both physiological and psychological one. And she also observed that there is, for example, a natural explosion into writing and reading, which happens between 3.5 and 4.5. And it was a really pure accident, let's say, how she discovered things. So, for example, the polarization of the child's attention and concentration. She tells in her books two very amazing stories. So one is a little girl working with the cylinder blocks, and she could repeat it as many times as she wanted. And the teacher counted, it was 52 times. So nobody asked her to do it. She was just repeating and going on and on. And when the 52nd time was finished, she sighed. There was a smile on her face. So there was something that was nourished internally in the child. And then that was done. So this activity completed its mission, let's say, in developing something in the child at this very moment. The same thing was with washing hands. So at some point, Maria Montessori saw a little girl was washing her hands over and over again. So the hands were already clean. There was no point in washing them again. But she was just completely mesmerized by her own hands and the soap and all of that. And so she was repeating this activity for a very long time. So there was something else in that activity beyond the direct purpose of it, to have the hands clean, that was enlightening the child from inside. And the same thing with the explosion in writing and reading. She actually was introducing some of the materials to all the children who were already 7. And like, for example, movable alphabet, something that we use still today in Montessori classrooms. And she noticed actually that a 4-year-old who was sitting next to the 7-year-old was much more interested and could really easily use this material. And that's how she noticed that this is where is the sensitive period for reading and writing is actually around 4. And if the material is there, if it's properly calibrated for the child, then the child can learn it in a very easy way. So the sensitive period is also a concept that Maria Montessori borrowed from a Dutch biologist, Hugo de Vries, who was observing the caterpillars. And he saw that at a certain point, the caterpillars are guided by light to go to a certain type of leaves on the stem. And so they can only eat those very tender leaves. They cannot eat anything else. But this light basically brings them to where the food is. And so this is the same kind of mechanism that we can see in this concept of sensitive period applied in Montessori classroom, is that there is this light that drives children towards something at a certain moment of time. So they choose certain activities, that they get interested in certain activities. They start looking around other children doing some activities. So this light is bringing them towards something that they need, that their internal law of development tells them to do. So these were the really key big discoveries. Of course, there were many, many details. And based on her experience in Casa dei Bambini in San Lorenzo, Maria Montessori really formulated the aim of education as an aid to life. So in The Secret of Childhood, her book, Maria Montessori assert that the child contains the soul of humanity and that he must be left free to develop. She also says that the child is the father of the man. I really like this, this metaphor. And education is thus understood as the way of helping people to live. So it's not only about getting some factual knowledge or learning something by heart. Is actually a much deeper function that education carries, is developing the human potential and helping the life to unfold. And the two conditions, according to her, were really essential for this to happen. So we must consider that the child does not develop randomly, but there is a program inside. He's guided by inner psychological development, and that there are certain characteristics that are formed at precise moments that are defined as sensitive periods. And the design of the environment that we offer to the child must be built according to the laws of natural development. And this environment should also allow the child to have the freedom to explore this environment, to make the choices in this environment and have purposeful activities in it. So without the freedom, the human development cannot happen. That's what Maria Montessori and many other philosophers were also saying. Another important concept of Montessori approach, Montessori philosophy, is the prepared environment. Very often when I say this for the first time, people don't always indirectly prepare the environment, making sure that the child can connect with the environment, that the environment is safe, clean, beautiful, attractive, and have everything in it. So of course the role model in a different kind of behavior, etc., but is a very withdrawn posture comparing to a traditional teacher. And then the fourth element of the prepared environment is the temporal environment. So it's also the very important parameter, because we want the child to develop at his own pace. So we know that all children are different, all adults are different. So it is important that the child can take time to make activity, to do the activity as long as he wants to. It's normal that some children can go faster in one area and take more time to develop their skills in other area, but we want to really the child to define that and to guide us. And we, of course, as adults will observe and see and make sure that all opportunities are there, and we've done everything for the child to get a variety of experiences in the environment. So these are the four main dimensions that I already mentioned. So we can go next. So this is another concept that Maria Montessori developed already at the end of her life, and it was even published after her death in 1952. So she talked about the 4 planes of development. So each plane goes for 6 years, from 0 to 6, from 6 to 12, from 12 to 18, and 18 to 24. So the first one being infancy, then childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. And every plane has an ascending and descending years. So something that we can characterize as something goes as a revolutionary development in the first half, and then more stabilizing and integrating period in the second half of each of those planes. And so despite a very regular way how it looks on this picture, I think one of the key differences of Maria Montessori's vision of human development is that it is not linear. And there's another picture that she also used in her writings, where we can see that the child development is not linear. It's not, okay, he's 3 years old, it's simple toys, simple activities, child gets 6, okay, the homework that kicks in, okay, middle school, tons of homework. So it's not because the child gets bigger in size by a certain number of centimeters every year, that the same thing should happen in an educational way, that it should become more difficult, more hard, more complicated, etc. So she was saying that that was one of the misconceptions of education in the world, and that in what she was saying is that in every plane of development there are certain characteristics, and these characteristics are very important to be taken into consideration when we build and design the environment for the child, be it physical space or activities that we use, or the way how the activities are performed. So it will be different from one plane to the other. And it's not only the question of the size of the chairs, it's actually in a very different way that the space and activities are organized. And just to give you, for example, something that struck me when I was actually thinking about this, and that I can also see now in my professional world with my own children as well, is that, for example, the children of 6 to 12 years old, and I have worked several years also as a teacher in an elementary classroom, they are incredibly, Maria Montessori was saying that it's the age of the most important intellectual development in our life, from 6 to 12. And I can attest to that, having worked in this approach with the children. It's amazing how fast their mind goes, how many things they know. If you give them the opportunity to go to develop in this type of environment, where they're free to explore, where they can move around, where they can develop their imagination, they can develop their reasoning mind and their social skills. It's completely incredible. It's really turbines from all perspectives. And at the same time, she was saying that in the adolescent years, there's so much things happening already in a physical transformation of the children, in all the questioning that they have between who am I, how should I be with the others, and all these different very tough things going on, that putting too much intellectual pressure on the children, especially between 12 and 15, may be counterproductive. And so the idea, for example, is to have more, let's call it curriculum to make it simple, but to have much more things that we can offer in 6 to 12 and a little bit less than maybe what usually happens in 12 to 15, just to make sure that these natural things that are happening, that the natural development is taken into consideration. So it's not just the program gets more difficult every year because the child gets older. So we need to take into account the fact that the development is holistic. It's not only mental thing is one and the physical is the other. It comes together. And how can we make sure that the most of the potential is nurtured in the first plane, the most of it is nurtured in the second, the most of it is nurtured in the third, and so forth. So that at 24, we are supposed to get to a mature adult who is ready to be there, out there in the adult world and contribute to it. So Rupali already mentioned the human tendencies at the very beginning, so it's just a quick snapshot, and the way also how all these human tendencies are at work. And I think what is important to mention, and that can also bring us a little bit outside of the whole education and child topic, but more already bringing us to general human topic and adult as well, is that these human tendencies are with us from the day we're born to the day we die. So it's something that is with us in all stages of our life. So we always need orientation. We always need some kind of order to be able to relate things, find things, etc. We need to work. And despite sometimes negative connotation that we may have as a society about work, it's actually in our genes. We are not born to do nothing. It's also in our DNA to explore things, to repeat things in order to perfect them, to look for exactness and precision. We are also we have a gregarious instinct, so we need to communicate with the others. And we also have this capacity of the mind to abstract things and create some ideas. I remember in elementary classroom, we tell children what we call great stories. So these are the 5 big stories about how the earth came about, how the life came on earth, how the humans came on earth, and then the story of writing and the story of mathematics. And when we talk about the story of the humans who are coming to earth, we say that they received three gifts. They received the hand to work, the mind to think and imagine, and the heart to love. And it's really something very beautiful that I really find so important, the way how we can see the wholeness in the human being. It is not only mental or intellectual development. There is the hand that is also Maria Montessori called it the instrument of a man's intelligence, that actually, thanks to the hand, that everything we have now in our civilization have been achieved for so many years. And then, of course, the heart that is at the center of our communion as a human species and our living together. So if we want to come back a little bit to the physical environment, so how do we define what is the physical environment for the children? So we will base it based on the plane of the development of the child. So we will not design in the same way the space for 3 to 6 years old as we will design it for 6 to 12 or for 12 to 15. And again, it's not only the matter of the size of the chairs and tables, or if there are digital devices present or not. It's really about conceptually seeing it differently. It is also determined by the psychological characteristic of the child in this plane of the development. So this is, for example, one of the elementary classrooms where we know that the children from 6 to 12 are incredibly interested in developing they're just incredibly interested in social development and being with the other children and talking to them and sharing what they know about insects, pharaohs, or something. They are incredibly interested in also abstracting things, in asking questions why. And so they need all these different materials and books and tools and mock-ups that they want to build to actually test the different hypotheses that they have. So it's completely different from what a 3 to 6 child will be, and so the environment will be very different. So, but the human tendencies, for example, will always be there. They will have a slightly different translation at different ages, but we will always have to carry them in mind, and also the sensitive periods of each plane of development. So, for example, for the first plane of development, so it means 0 to 6, but more specifically 3 to 6, because we would also have a separate environment for toddlers from 1.5 to 3. And then for babies, that is called nido, it will be again different because of the very drastic changes that happen in this age group. But this is the picture from a children's house from a 3 to 6 years old. We know that in this plane of development, the children are going through the sensitive period of order. So the physical order is very important because it is a guarantor of emotional security and safety. The children need to know when they come into their classroom, okay, where things are, okay, they're still in the same place, I know how to reach them, I know where things are, I feel safe. So order is very important, the physical order. They're also in a sensitive period of movement, so they do need to move around. They need to combine the motor and cognitive development together. So it's really by manipulating either with their hand or with their whole body that they need to be actively involved and be able to move freely in the classroom. It's also the sensitive period of sensorial development. So there will be a lot of things that they can discover through sensorial material, but then more generally being able to manipulate things. Then, of course, language, it's the critical period of language development. So we know that the child, for example, who has never been exposed to language beyond the age of 10 would never speak. And so the child needs to have an environment that is rich in language. And here's something that we really pay a lot of attention to in Montessori, is not to use any kind of simple baby talk or simplified language. We actually teach children in this age the scientific names of things, be it triangles or shapes of leaves. We will give them the completely scientific botanic terms, because what we know also about this period is that they have the absorbent mind. That's the period of absorbent mind where everything that is in the environment, they just take it in. You can also think about it as a camera where you just click on a button and whatever is in front you takes in. If it's a poor environment, it goes in. If it's a rich environment, it goes in. And so it becomes the part of the child and who he is. And so this precision and richness of the motives and richness of vocabulary or experiences is really very important. At the same time, It's not about overstimulating children. It's not about making them with the idea that we want to have geniuses out of those children. It's not totally not the ethos is the idea to really give the children what they need, what each of them can handle, can use in their environment. And you can see that the environment is also very beautiful. In a way, it is simple, but also very pure. There is no primary colors flashing on the walls. There is no plastic things all around. So it's a very beautiful, homey looking environment where the child can actually feel himself part of it, that he belongs to this place. And what is also important to notice is that you see we have most of the tables and chairs are individual, contrary again to very traditional kindergartens where there will be a lot of group tables, a lot of group activities, because we think that if we put children together to do a coloring activity, they're going to socialize and learn something. But the reality shows us that they can not actually at this age, because they're going to compare each other, they're going to push each other, they're not going to be able to cope with that. And so we know that the child at this age is inward oriented. He's very self-centered, and it's not about him being selfish or something. It's the plan of the nature. The child of this age needs the time for himself. He needs the time to actually understand who am I, what I like, what I need, etc. So he needs this time and he needs this privacy. He needs this individual table to actually take an activity and do it as long as he wants. And so, and the moments of actually socialization happens naturally when we have a meal together, when we have lunch, when we go to the park, when you actually go to the bathroom and there are only 3 taps, and then you have to wait. You have to wait until your friends are finished. So these are the real occasions for learning to live together. These are the real lessons of socialization. It's not sitting together and doing a coloring activity. And so that's really also a very fundamental way of how differently we see the needs of the children and how we design differently the space. To the contrary, this is an example of an elementary classroom where one of the key differences versus the 0 to 6 is the incredible social development. It's really something that happens almost overnight between 5 and 6 usually, or 7, when children become so attached to their friends, they don't want to leave the school anymore. The parents start being less interesting to a certain extent, and they always want to talk to their friends. And so the way how we're going to group the tables and chairs is very different. You can see that they're all tables and chairs for several children. That's also how we're going to do the lesson. So if we in 3 to 6, it was individual in many cases. Here we would do most of the time small group lessons. We'll also vary the shapes of those tables. You can see a hexagonal table there. So we want also to nurture that curiosity that children have at this age. They have this need of not a physical order anymore. And that's also why, by the way, they become quite messy. With their belongings and everything, but because their interest goes into the intellectual order. They want to understand things, how they relate to each other. They want to think by themselves. And so everything in the classroom should be nourishing their curiosity. Oh, there is a bit of a weird plant. Why is it so weird? Or there is a nice artifact. Or there is a table, the hexagonal table that actually, if you split it in 2, you can have 2 trapezoids. So there's all these different things that we're going to have in the environment that we want to use as a leverage for basically responding to their needs. So all these psychological characteristics that the children have at this age need to find their reflection in the physical environment and the materials, of course. So that was my first chapter about Montessori. There will be, after I speak about Christopher Alexander, the connection between the two. I don't know if there are any questions so far. Maybe it can be a good moment to answer.
If you have a question, you can type an exclamation mark in the chat and we'll call. Shrikant, do you have any thoughts?
So firstly, I want to encourage people, if you have questions or if you have short comments, please do so. I thought, Maria, this was a very beautiful presentation. on Maria Montessori. I particularly liked how the entire her life story, because she kind of, got her hands dirty right in the beginning, or really sacred right in the beginning.
Exactly.
Because she started interacting with kids, as a doctor, and then used all the observations. So it was just beautiful. It's also shows reverence. That's the only word I can use. She has reverence for children. She has reverence for human beings, and it shows through. So she actually puts in the effort of seeing who these people are, and therefore, how do you need to deal with them? And goes on to develop it instead of having a cookie cutter, like the first classroom picture that you showed of a normal school where there are these bunch, this rows of children sitting. It's like, it's really demeaning to what they are as beings. And so she takes that, and she has these rich observations about every stage, every faculty of the child, and she develops everything. So I thought you did a fantastic job doing that. I think Jyoti had a question. Jyoti, go ahead. Give me just a second. I have to unmute everybody. Hold on. Sorry about this. Go ahead, Jyoti.
Oh, Jyoti, you're still
Jyoti,
mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks once again. I mean, Shrikant said it all, and it's lovely. I have a great deal of respect for Montessori programs and the concepts and the formation of the program itself from the standpoint of every child develops at his own pace. And actually, we also develop, not only child develops at their own pace, but adults do. As old as I am, I'm watching that too. I only have one question. What happens to the special needs children? Like, for example, you said that little girl was washing her hands over and over and over. She was fascinated with her hands. What is it, 52 times? So somewhere along the lines, this child would have been identified as a compulsive disordered behavioral child. So where do you draw the line with a child like that? This is just one instance I'm saying. Even for attention and concentration, some children have ADD, ADHD, or whatever. So they do take time. But at what point you decide, okay, this is a child who is definitely learning at his own pace, but needs something more specialized than Montessori program. Do you make that distinction, or you just let the child keep rolling on until the child has, for some reason, come to the conclusion that I got to make it or I got to fake it? Where do you draw that line? That's my question.
So thank you very much for the question. So observation is a very important part of our work in Montessori classroom, as it was originally also performed by Maria Montessori. So we always observe the children, and of course we have after you have worked with the children for many years, you know what is, let's say, still a typical development or atypical development, even within a Montessori classroom. So of course we will see something that is when the child is normally repeating the activity, they may not do it 52 times. It was more like an example to show, but when the child normally repeats the activity, it's a good sign because they want to practice it. They need to build those neural pathways, and you can only do it by when you repeat the activity, but you repeat it from your own wish and not because the adult forces you to, or there is a punishment or reward behind. So this is a key also difference when this repetition is needed and it comes from the child naturally. Now, of course, when we see certain things that are atypical, we would have a closer observation. We may also bring some external specialists in. And there is also a program that is now designed Montessori for special needs that also addresses the different materials that have been developed for children with ADHD or other challenges that can be brought into the classroom, where it can be a special setting that is, let's say, framed for the children with those learning differences. But we do still see that in a Montessori environment for those children is a much more favorable environment than a traditional setting, because of this freedom that exists to respect every child as an individual, as a human being, and give this scientific observation opportunities and then provide the necessary help. But just to summarize, with the experience, we can distinguish, of course, when it's a normal development and then or a typical development.
Yes, Suhiko, you're next. You need to unmute.
Okay.
Oh, just a second. I don't know what happened.
No,
Okay,
that's okay.
go ahead. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Maria, this is a fascinating presentation, really.
Thank you.
Yeah. A few months ago, my wife and I were watching a program on 13 women, historically, the people who made a big difference. Indira Gandhi was one of them, and Maria Montessori was the last one. And having watched all those 13 women, it's interesting, I think, in terms of lasting influence, her work has the greatest impact on humanity because it deals with education. And so I learned a lot about her life, and also, looking at this impact, she made a huge difference, continue to make a huge difference for humanity. So quite a remarkable woman. And I think Rupali and I had some conversation about comparing between Montessori and Rudolf Steiner education. And today's presentation is very interesting because the plane of development, they have 6 years in Montessori, and Steiner has 7. And it seems that the Steiner created his system based on his esoteric knowledge of humans, whereas Maria Montessori observed children more, in a way, more inductive and scientific. It's like a, and so this 6-year period is extremely interesting to me, and start to make more sense. So this is what I'm learning today at this moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And just to add on this question of planes of development, what is also really fascinating, and I think we can always keep this in mind, whether we are talking to our families, relatives, friends, children, somewhere else, they will always have those psychological characteristics that I mentioned, like I just mentioned for the first 2, but in each plane, there are those manifestations. And regardless whether the children are in a Montessori setting or not, they will always express them. The only thing is whether the environment supports them or it actually does not allow for them to manifest themselves. And that's where the whole possibility of development can be added or hindered.
Yeah. How do you deal with the individual differences of children?
From which perspective?
So does everybody have this 6-year cycle? Or somebody may have a little bit faster or longer. That's number one. And also each child has a different talent. And so this is a generalized environment in which each child developed. So how do you deal with this individual differences in the environment of this education?
So, of course, 6 years is a modelized approach, which is still based on a profound observation. So most of the time it is true. And so, for example, and there is always transition. So, for example, when the child goes between first plane to the second, it usually starts between 5.5 till, I would say, 7. So there is this differences where you can already see things happening for one child at 5.5, and the other one will only get there closer to 7.
Mm.
Same when you go from second plane to the third, when they to the adolescence, there is also differences. Even if you compare boys and girls, they do not, from the physiological and physical development, there is already a difference, statistically speaking. So for boys, it happens a little bit later, but there is still key characteristic that will be there. For example, a 12-year-old child, he will still be in what we call the second plane, because he will still be playing, like he may have already very philosophical discussions going on about civilization, etc. But at the same time, he will readily play, I don't know, hide and seek with some friends, or doing something more like, let's say, childish, because he's still finishing this childhood phase, let's say. And it's also very interesting that Maria Montessori considered that childhood is over at 12. And so after 12, it's already young adults.
Mm.
And there's also a completely different perspective on,
Mm-hmm.
on humans than the way how we see children.
One more thing I found it very interesting, you know, not therapy, but education thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually applies to all adults as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mention, because it can be another presentation for another day, but there is a lot of now work and research that is done about applied Montessori pedagogy for the elderly people. There is a huge body of clinical research, which may be even bigger than what has been done for children, for many reasons, because there is aging population, there is more money maybe also in this sector. So there's a lot of clinical research, and there are now assisted living facilities for the elderly people that practice Montessori pedagogy. And I have been in my schools that I founded in Paris. I also had a project, intergenerational project, where we had this collaboration with this kind of facility nearby. And so the children were going there, the residents were coming to see us, and they were trying to implement Montessori. And it's amazing how the parallels are between 3 to 6, for example, and elderly people. If you compare traditional approach, traditional daycare, traditional assisted living facility for the elderly, it's completely the same disaster, like really. And so to see the how Montessori approach can help the people to actually not to regress and actually progress, when you can look at the people, okay, what they can still do, instead of counting everything that they can't and giving them medication for that, how you can also create the environment where people can still do things by themselves, when they can still feel that they can preserve their dignity, when they can still eat by themselves, they can still contribute to the community and do things together. That's a completely amazing also work that is now going on.
Maria, that is just incredibly intriguing, okay? Because, and I would love to have you come back another day and do a presentation on that. Because what I see in Montessori, and I've always seen this right from the beginning, core thing about Montessori is her view of human beings. That's what it is. And children, because she does such a good job on the reason she does such a good job on children is that she knows what a human being is, and she uses that as a standard. There is this one chart that you use, the hexagons. All of those things are applicable to all of us all the time. And these pieces come together in a certain way, and then sometimes fall apart in a certain way. But if you have the picture of the whole, then you can help people at every stage of development. And it's really intriguing to see this, your project. So would love to have you come back. All right. So can we go ahead and continue with the second part of the presentation? Wait a minute, Rupali has something.
Yeah,
Rupali.
I think Jyoti has something to say too, and I also have a point, an observation to make. So Jyoti, go ahead.
Rupali, Jyoti, you need
Jyoti,
to.
you're on mute.
Okay. I think I told Rupali a while ago, I don't know if you remember, and you had said we might do that. After I retired, I really wanted to go to a school for the adults, which had a foundation of Montessori, Madame Montessori. because I think my spatial skills were never there up to the par. And I somehow weaved my way around and I made it. But my question to you was, you use observations as a tool to diagnose whether the child has special needs and needs something else, or continue to be in the same program. So that's the only tool. You don't believe in diagnostic evaluations by the school psychologists at all?
No, we do. As I mentioned, we do bring external specialists as well when we see that our knowledge in a way is exhausted, because we're not also specialized, psychologists or specialized therapists. So we always work with the people in our community for basically getting their expertise and their knowledge. And then together we work in how we can make this environment the most beneficial for the child. What kind of adjustments do we need? Does the child need maybe a space that is more enclosed, or he needs a material that is a bit different? So we always work together when we see that there is an extra help needed. But sometimes, to your also question, like I know people who only when they were 15, they realized that they had dyslexia, but it never came across in their educational path as like something that has a problem, because the material and a lot of things help them overcome it and not even almost feel it. So yes, they may get this formal diagnosis later, but they completely made it through their educational path. So depending on how difficult it is or how big the challenge is, sometimes it can be really smoothened within a normal Montessori environment, and sometimes we need to bring external experts to help us.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yasuhiko and then Rupali. Yasuhiko, go ahead.
As Shrikan said, having missed the Montessori education when I was growing up, now I can find an opportunity to join and learn and grow. That's very nice. Now, not only Steiner, in the esoteric teachings, we have the 7-year growing period all the way into like 84. And I'm wondering if this plane of development that she developed, you have extended that into the older age.
I don't think she ever wrote about it, but
No, I don't think so. But the people who followed her and now applying this to the older people like myself.
Not as much, not what I aware of, but it's true that also in a Chinese philosophy, for example, you also find those cycles that continue.
Yes.
They
Yes.
continue of
Yes.
6-7 years,
Yeah.
and mean different things. So of course there is something, but I think Maria Montessori was more focused on the path to maturity to the 24.
Uh-huh.
And now the new trend is really not the new trend, but the new interest is also with the aging population. So not so much into formalizing some kind of theoretical.
Okay.
I think more practically how to help people.
Okay.
I just wanted to add a couple of observations, Jyoti, to your point about how do we work with students with different abilities. The Montessori environment is such that children don't even manifest some of those behaviors that they would in a traditional classroom, because the environment allows them to be themselves and allows them to grow at their own pace or be who they are, and they can take their time. And I don't know if those disabilities are not manifested because the work is there and the children get satisfaction from the work. Now, in severe cases where the disabilities do manifest, the Montessori environment is truly for every child, for every human being. It is our mindset and our prejudices that get in the way of the child's success. So, for example, we have 2 students with autism diagnosis. With one family, the parent completely embraces the child's uniqueness and the child is happy and she's doing very well in the school. And children accept, children don't even see the differences. They're like, okay, that's who she is and that's the work she's going to do. On the other hand, we had a family who refused to acknowledge that their child had any issues and just withdrew their application and enrollment. And so we lost an opportunity with another child. So I think it's, our prejudices that come in the way of the child's learning. So I think it's a lot depends on how we approach children. And then my observation, I want to add on to what Maria, you have been talking about is when you look at the Montessori classroom, it's not just for academic growth. In traditional schools, academics are given a lot of importance that you have to study your math and language and have you got your worksheet done and so on and so forth. Montessori is so unique that you're also looking at the social formation of the child, and language is such a big part of that development. So allowing children to interact, I think, as Maria, you'll probably talk more about it as you talk about the environment. But the environment is created for social interactions as well as for individual work. It reminds me of Jacob Brownowski's idea that humans are both individual as well as social animals. And Maria Montessori does a fantastic job of integrating those two human needs, which seem so diametrically opposite, but are so integral for our development. She integrates them in the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupali.
Uh,
So
yeah, please continue.
let me share again my screen. So now I would like to move to a second part that will be about Christopher Alexander and the way what I could learn about his work and also different ideas that I found fascinating. And then in the last part, we'll talk about how the two meet each other. So Christopher Alexander was born in Austria in 1936, and soon after the family moved to England, where he grew up. In 1954, he was awarded the scholarship for Trinity College in chemistry and physics. It was quite difficult already to get there. And then he went on to read mathematics. And so he earned a bachelor degree in architecture and a master's in mathematics. And then he went to Harvard to do his PhD in architecture. And it was the first PhD actually in architecture that was ever awarded at Harvard. And you can see that his background of mathematics and also physics, you can also find in his books all the richness of examples and connections that he makes between the universe, the mathematics, biology, and architecture. It's, for me, one of the most fascinating things that I've read. So he also moved later to Berkeley, where he was offered the role of a professor of architecture at the University of Berkeley, and the position that he held for 40 years. And he also was the head of Center for Environmental Design, and he also did a lot of practical work. So on top of all the amazing books that he wrote and the teaching and the number of students whose life he changed, he also himself designed and built more than 200 buildings on 5 continents. And this is one of the sayings of Christopher Alexander. I didn't mention, but Christopher Alexander passed away a bit more than 2 years ago. So every building must heal the world. I remember what also struck me in one of his writings when he was saying, when you want to build a highway, the first thing that you should be thinking about how this highway gonna make the hill look more beautiful. And this is something that was completely mind-blowing as a consideration when you think about those things as highway. So this idea that everything we create is actually has this contribution to the bigger whole, to the bigger environment. It is part of it. And if we are to build something, we should make it better and not worse. Christopher Alexander talks a lot about what is life and what does it mean that the building is alive or something is alive. So he says that every form of order has some degree of life, that we can also experience it ourselves, so we can feel when we are in a building, when we are in a room, when we look at the cup, we can see we can experience different degrees of life in them. And what is most striking is that, surprisingly, this feeling will be most of the time shared by everyone. And this is one of the debate that he's also taking in his books, is the fact that very often people think, well, everything is personal, we all have personal tastes, we always have this idiosyncratic idea of like, you cannot judge the taste of other people, beauty is subjective, everything is subjective, but in the end of the day, when you statistically measure things, it's not so different in the end. And what he's also saying is that this feeling of feeling life in a certain place, it's something that is the same for most of the people. And so he also writes, the search which we make for this quality in our own lives is the central search of any person and the crux of any individual person's story. It is the search for those moments and the situations when we're most alive. That's the quote from The Timeless Way of Building, one of his also major books. In the same book, he first mentions something that has a very intriguing name, which is called the quality without a name. So he talks about this whole idea, what makes it the building alive, what it is that you come to a place, you come to a building, and it might have been here for many centuries, but it's still alive. You can still feel the life there. And maybe across the road, there's another building that was just built yesterday, and it's already dead. It's already lifeless, to use the term of Christopher Alexander. So what is it, that thing that make it alive? And he continues using this intriguing name, saying that it's a quality without a name, that there is no word basically that can be used to precisely describe it. And so he talks a little bit like in a riddle about what it is. And so it says, it is never twice the same because it always takes its shape from the particular place in which it occurs. It is a subtle form of freedom from inner contradictions that makes things alive. It is a system has this quality without a name when it is at one with itself. It has it when it is true to own inner forces. It has it when it is at peace with itself. He also talks about alive versus lifeless. So it's a very different comparison to what we usually are used to. Usually we think, okay, living and non-living. So a human being, a nature thing is a living, and then a stone or water is a non-living. But he actually sees it very different. He sees that a wave is alive, and even a human being can be lifeless. So this distinction between alive versus lifeless is a key in the way how he uses this quality without a name. He also says a thing is whole to how free it is of inner contradictions. He also says it sometimes can be called comfortable, so we feel comfortable in a place without it being like too comfy or too smooth, but really just comfortable. Can also be used the adjective of free. It also says that it's never calculated and is never exact. It only happens when ideas and images are left behind. And here already he tells us this key concept that we will explore a bit later, when we want to build things from our experience and feeling and not of our preconceived ideas and images that we have in our head. He also called this quality without a name as something that is egoless. And he also says that when something has already this idea of the masterpiece mastermind of someone, an architect who wanted to do something extraordinary, you can always feel it. You can always feel that it is not egoless. And then in the end, he also uses the description of being eternal. So very often those places, they feel so solid and so stable that they can be there for centuries and they still have the same feeling of being full of life and being alive. Christopher Alexander also talks a lot about wholeness, and in his 4 volumes that are amazing work of writing that combines everything: mathematics, biology, physics, architecture. It's the nature of order. So there are 4 volumes that are called, that have very also fascinating names. The phenomenon of life, for example, or the process of creating life. And so the wholeness is something that is a key concept that Christopher Alexander tries to explain what creates this wholeness. Basically, what is this quality without the name? So building as a whole means that we see it as a part of an extended and undivided continuum. It contains many wholes within it, and it's also unbounded and continuous in their connection. So the part enriches the whole, and the whole enriches the part. And in any given region of space, some subregions have higher intensity as centers. He used a lot this word, the centers or the field of centers, and other have less. Many regions have weak intensity or none at all. And this is what creates that structure that can create this wholeness of that region. So Christopher Alexander is also known as a father of a Spartan language, and this whole movement of Spartan development. By the way, he is also very well known for this in the software. So he also worked at MIT for quite many years, and where his Spartan or generative grammar, what is now called, is used in software development. So he wrote an amazing book that I think he's most famous for in wider circles in 1977 that is called The Spartan Language, where there is a collection of 253 different patterns of how to design different places and spaces. And it can go from a kitchen space to a playground to a church, and like really amazing examples. And so what is in each of these patterns? So this concept that life is in essence and a starting point, and that these patterns are atoms, sort of atoms of the environment. And pattern in this approach is basically a planning tool or a design principle that helps us to find a solution for a problem that recurrently happens in this situation, recurrently happens in the environment, where it basically occurs. As an example, we can look at the pattern that is called entrance transition. And so through the experiential observation, Christopher Alexander derives that buildings, and especially houses with a graceful transition between the street and the inside, are more tranquil than those which open directly off the street. And he explains that we as human beings, when we come home, we need a transition space to go from a very public sphere where we are in a big public to something that is very intimate as our home. Cannot be just be the door of the street. It's too much shock right away. So we need this transition to basically bring us from one role, from one sphere of our life to something very different. And he looks at different examples how this implemented in different buildings, can be libraries, churches, private houses. And then the solution of the pattern that he proposed is make a transition space, bring the path which connects street and entrance through this transitional space, and mark it with a change of light, a change of sound, a change of direction, a change of surface, a change of level, behaves by gateways which make a change of enclosure, and above all with a change of view. So whatever we can do to plant a jasmine which will have a smell that reminds us that it's smell towards home, or a little light that goes on when we start working on the stairs, or the stairs themselves. So whatever this little preparation that will happen, it will help us ease into our life at home. And more generally, I think what I really find it fascinating is that this whole idea that the space can basically either help us solve our internal conflicts that we all have, or it can actually crystallize it. So for example, this idea of I want to be inside or I want to be outside, and we can have this wish all the time. So when we're at home, we maybe want to be close to the window, to be close to light, but we also want to see what is outside, but at the same time, we want to be comfortable in our own place. So how can we decide a place that allows us both? And we don't have to choose between going to the window and being uncomfortable or sitting in a dark corner of the room. So all of these psychological things that we have, that what we also just talked about, the fact that sometimes we want to be alone or we want to be together with the others, how can we create spaces where those internal forces within us are not, that actually this conflict is resolved instead of being crystallized. Another very interesting aspect that Christopher Alexander talks about in his Nature of Order books is the 15 properties of living structures. So through his observations, through different analytical things that he did, he derived 15 properties that are listed here. So there are levels of scale, strong centers, boundaries, alternating repetition, positive space, good shape, local symmetries, deep interlock and ambiguity, contrast, gradients, roughness, echoes, the void, simplicity and inner calm, and not separatedness, that were, according to him, the main things that needs to be there in different architectural designs that make it, the building or the ornament or something that we're looking at, come to life. I have a few examples just to illustrate some of them. So you can see, for example, on the left one, the positive space. On the right one is the building in Perugia, alternating repetition with the windows, with the body life, the levels of scale. Here you can see, for example, the boundaries. Again, the levels of scale, echoes on the cupboard, strong centers on the blouse. So these are basically different elements that from the geometrical point of view, from the design point of view, are important to make the building come to life, according to Christopher Alexander. Another key difference of the approach of Christopher Alexander versus, I would say, more traditional approach in architecture is the generative approach versus a blueprint design. So if we compare the two, the generative approach is about the process of how to make a living structure step by step and one step at a time, by really using an unfolding process. So there is an unfolding that happens, that you basically do things brick by brick, by respecting certain also geometric processes in it. And you, in the end, you don't know what the result will be, because you're not starting from a drawing, you're not starting from a blueprint, you're not starting from, again, the mental and image idea, but you're starting from a feeling, and you're starting from a small identified center that already has some wholeness in it, and you build it up. Well, the second approach, that is a blueprint design, is okay, you do the blueprint, you do the plan, the drawing, you know what you want to get in the end. But the truth is that when we talk about the complex buildings, the complex projects, there are so many factors that there will be inherently too many mistakes. And this is also very often the approach where the ego of the architect becomes forefront, where it's the most important part in the end of the day, because their name is on that project. And so they don't want to allow any kind of uncertainties, any kind of irregularities or unpredictable results. And what happened in the narrative approach that Christopher Alexander proposed, which he called the step-by-step adaptation, is that you need to do things progressively. And like the couple examples that he shows to illustrate that if you just mathematically, statistically speaking, you have 30 coins, and let's say you have a certain combination of how you want them to fall, tail or head. If you throw them all in the air together, the chances that you will get them in the right combination are very slim. And you will have to try over and over again throwing those coins. And according to his calculation, you can be trying for 300 years to get it right. Well, if you throw one coin by one and you just get until it's in the right position, it's going to be just an exercise of a few hours. He also gives an example of how a human embryo develops, that there is a reason why it takes 9 months, because every cell develops one after the other. And if there is something happening on one stage, there is an opportunity to correct it in the next stage. So everything really nourishing the whole, because it goes step by step. It's impossible to design complex systems, and complex buildings are also complex systems, from just a plan. It will look too, it will not look alive most of the time, with a lot of also, again, inherent mistakes. One of the concepts that is also very interesting in Christopher Alexander approach, that's already in the process of how to create those buildings with this approach that he promotes, is using, for example, feelings map. So already this idea that feeling as a central criterion for well-adapted environments is something that was quite revolutionary at that time, and now I think is more coming to more wide understanding of the people, because you can hear more and more discussions nowadays about well-being at work and how people feel and all of that, which was probably not the concern of most of the employers at the time of Christopher Alexander. But this idea that the person's feeling in the area is a direct indication of this evaluation of the state, of how the plays come together, and how this functional order is making this impact on the human well-being. And so these feelings are not idiosyncratic again, but they're shared by everyone. And for example, when we want to, let's say, study a neighborhood or something and identify where are the areas that people feel good, or what are the areas that when some repair needs to happen, it can look like this. So the people will be given a certain document, or it can be an application, where they will have to mark in every area, for example, this street or the other corner or whatever, in the different areas, they will have to mark how they feel. Do they feel very good? Do they feel good? Do they feel not so good or bad? And I think we all know those places or streets where we like taking our time to walk and stroll and look around and etc. And the streets where we want to avoid, or the streets where we don't feel so comfortable, like, or areas or places where we don't feel so comfortable being there. There is something that is off. We don't sometimes understand it or really conscious about that. We just avoid it. And so it does show that there is a lot of shared feeling for people about how the space relate to our internal well-being. And so those feeling maps they can be used as an aggregated tool. So they can be people, both let's say residents of the neighborhood and professionals. They can work together and create different feeling maps, and then create aggregated view of what it looks like. And based on that feelings map, we can see what are the strong centers, where is already some wholeness that is present, that is experienced by people pretty much in a shared way. What are those centers that are really weak, and what are the centers that are latent? That means that they are there, but they need to be improved. And what can we do to convert them into strong centers? Another also concept that we use is project language. It's basically a collection of patterns that we use or we derive for a given project. It can be any project, can be a house, a garden, a piece of furniture. And so the project language is really something I really like about this approach. Is a sort of a poetic description or poetic description of architectural design of the place. And so we usually derive some themes, and within those themes, we derive some patterns that we want to use in this project. And how do we come up with this project language is most of the time by talking to the clients, talking to the people who are involved, to the neighbors, depending what is the project. We will have a certain interview process where we will ask questions. It's a guided interview process where we want the people to visualize and to feel what do they see when they first thing wake up in the morning in their bedroom. What do they see when people are over as guests in their house, etc. So there will be a lot of this visualization, basically exercise, where we will try to derive from the main stakeholders what is that they want to feel, how they want to feel in that place. And so I did it, for example, for one of the project I worked, so it was a toddler community garden. I'll just quickly show. So it's a simple document in the end, but where just go to which can have some sketches or drawings, can make it more or less busy or not. So these are the targeted audience, just for your knowledge, when I talk about toddlers and those ones. And the toddler community garden, so the project language is, so it has different themes. It has the children's garden, so it's a children's place, which has a garden from the past, so it's a little barn, there's a comforting covered veranda. The second theme is living walls. So that was a specific project where it was a very, very long and narrow garden, so a very difficult shape to deal with. And so those walls, it was important to really make them alive. And so the old walls of the garden become alive. And how do we do it? Through different patterns. So one pattern is, for example, niches for wildlife, or raised flowers, or sunny wall, or aromatic garden. We also know that for the toddlers, in our Montessori approach, is very important the purposeful movement and the maximum effort. And we want also to repeat that need that they have in open air. And so they have the heavy cars and the wheelbarrows, they have a climbing wall, they have a rainwater collector and a water pump. So we want them to be able to practice that even outside. It's the garden that also has the destinations. So there is some sort of kind of a main street, although it's of course very tiny, but to the right and to the left, there are different destinations. There is a sand pit surrounded by a sitting wall. There is a fountain against the wall. There is a cockatarium where the quails live. There is a cabane magique, which means like a hut. And then there is this journey where children, when they go to those destinations, they go through this main street, they go through arched trellis with flowers, they cross the little bridge, etc., etc. So that's really just to give you an idea of how it can look like. But I really like the fact that it's not about, a technical, of course, there can be technical documentation, all of that, but this whole starting point of a feeling and how it makes you feel and what is the end result, how do you visualize it, how you want to experience it, is so important for making to make a project that is alive. And this is also a quote of Christopher Alexander that I like a lot, that making wholeness heals the maker. And I think it truly is. And this role of architect in the approach of Christopher Alexander is, to me, also very interesting one. It also has a lot of parallels with Montessori, where it's really the person who is guiding everything together to make the wholeness arise, basically, because the wholeness is already there. To the same extent, the potential of the child is already there, but something needs to bring it out. So in the case of Christopher Alexander, he brings out this wholeness by orchestrating everything that in this process, by talking to the people, by creating this feelings map, identifying the centers, and then by step-by-step approach unfolding this wholeness. And this is pretty much how we also see the development of the child in Montessori, where we know that it's there, and through the environment, the child can reveal himself. So now I go to more some of these interconnections, unless you want to first have questions on Christopher Alexander approach.
What do you think, Rupali? Any, you want to take some questions?
I think how about just a couple? I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure that we have time for the presentation. So
Okay.
if any questions just about Christopher Alexander's approach?
Okay, I think let's continue because we are
You can
running.
go ahead, Maria. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, let's go ahead because we're running short of time. We'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards, so we can bring together. I'm not that familiar with Christopher Alexander, and I thought what you provided was a fantastic summary, and it really spoke to me. So thank you so much. Please go on.
Sure. So now I would like to talk about all these different concepts that I see as really close together between Maria Montessori and Christopher Alexander. So both of them talk about order and wholeness and how it can create conditions for developing human potential, nourishing human potential. And I think it's really interesting that we can see that both of them say that there is in each order, there is a life, and there is life in the order. And so we can say that life actually seeks organization and order at every level of the universe. That's something that is inherent in it. And just for a few examples here, we can look at the human body and see these billions of cells working together non-stop. And we know also that life is self-organizing by its very nature. So there is a way how the nature plans that very complex systems can actually self-organize themselves, like a human body, like a forest, like this example of murmuration, where thousands of birds are flying in sync with one another without anybody telling them what to do. And I think this is one of the key themes in both Maria Montessori and Christopher Alexander, who were against this, the will, the power of the adult over children, or the power and the will of the architect or state or whatever it is over their architecture. So there is this already self-organizing mechanism that exists. And also an interesting quote that I like by Margaret Whitley, who's a famous Montessorian: self-organization is not a startling new feature of the world. It is the way how the world has created itself for billions of years. In all of human activity, self-organization is how we begin. It is what we do until we interfere with the process and try to control one another. So these are again the key principles of Maria Montessori that are, some of them already mentioned. So we talk about the fundamental needs, how we can create an environment where those fundamental needs are met. And we have a special chart in Montessori for that, but which is basically a very similar concept as the Maslow pyramid, but we also apply it to the children. So it's not only to the adults. We talk about spiritual needs, we talk about material needs, we talk about the human tendencies. There needs to be also the freedom for the children, where they can also experience freedom and responsibility as the two sides of the same coin. There is no freedom without responsibility and vice versa. Where there is agency, so the child can feel that he is capable and he can do things by himself, where there is a possibility to learn from the others and not only from the adult. And when these two conflicting forces that Rupali also mentioned, this idea of self and togetherness, of who am I, what I want, what I need, and what can I do also for the others, and what can I do with the others together, this articulation is really critical in a Montessori approach. So the Montessori classrooms are self-organizing communities, so we do a lot of things. And of course, with the age of the children, the environment will be different, but we give them the opportunities to organize things by themselves and give them the right challenge of what do we want to have already ready for them, or do we want them to come up with themselves, depending on how old they are. So I want to talk about also Montessori architecture. So there has been in the last 3 years great work done by Steve Lawrence and Benjamin Staley. So I reference here the website, their website, Montessori Architecture. There is also a book that was published by them. So it's really a design instrument for schools where they derived 28 patterns that were identified for Montessori schools across different climate zones and countries. So you can, I will mention just some of them, but you can later explore if you're interested, all the 28 of them. And it's really very, I would say it's a mini version of a pattern language, like the book that Christopher Alexander wrote, and Steve Lawrence actually studied at Berkeley. So he knows it also from the first source. And these are really the patterns that are important in Montessori world, but not only. I think it's also something that any school can apply, but of course, when it's combined with Montessori philosophy, that gives the best result and the best conditions for the children. So this work presents those patterns as well as illustrations of the different schools in different countries of how they implemented this pattern. So for example, one of them is that Montessori school is there is a hierarchy of interconnected spaces that are adapted to children's activities. So the classroom for the children is never like a pure, or most of the time, let's say, or not intentionally, it's not a rectangular where the most important thing is to supervise the children and to make sure nobody is doing anything in the corner. It's really a more diversified space with different alcoves, with different areas, with the different connected spaces where everything is adapted to the children's activities. There's also a bathroom, as you can see, it's always integrated into the classroom, is never somewhere down the corridor in some kind of a cold place where the children are scared to go to. It's really, everything is part of the living experience of the child, and there are different motives and different places where the child can go. If he wants to be closer to the window, or if he wants to go sit in a little corner at some point of the day, or he wants to be with the friends. So there's always this variety of spaces where the child can feel himself well. So another one is the use of the floor as a primary workspace. This is a very also interesting one and very typical for Montessori education. So we tend to have, again, as much as possible, the spacious classroom, and also quite a lot of children comparing to, let's say, most traditional schools. And a lot of that space is needed to place the material, etc., but also to allow the children to work on the floor. And this is not only for toddlers, it's true for elementary, it's true for adolescent. So there's a lot of materials that they can use on the floor, so they will roll out their rug and work on it. They can work on a chair, they can work standing, they can work seated but on a low table, so sitting on the floor. And to us in Maria Montessori, it's really normal and important for children to work in the way they want, as long as they don't disturb each other, or they don't do something negative to material, or they don't damage things. It's not important. And what is also interesting is that Maria Montessori was also a big expert in anthropology. In her books, she wrote a lot of interesting things. And she was actually the first one who created this idea that children need small chairs and tables, because before her it was all adult size. And she was the first one who actually got interested into design of the furniture for children and design also of the spaces for children. And she worked with Italian factory and then later also German and Austrian factories to design all sorts of tables and chairs for children. And what she was also saying is that the seating position is not the most natural for most of the children, not because they're naughty or because they can't, they don't have concentration, but just for simple reason that the proportion of their body from the torso to the lower body is different from the adult, and it makes it really difficult for them to stay seated, like in a very straight position, just because the body is not yet there. And so the position on the floor, working on the floor, is totally normal and much easier for the children. So we integrate the floor space and we plan our space and our rooms in a way that this possibility is there. And sometimes we may have, for example, an activity with the beads material. The children learn to count until 1,000. It's a special chain and a special mat that is 8 meters long that the children need to unroll in the classroom to be able to place all the material. Sometimes it takes 2 days to work it out. And so this is really an important part of how movement can be encouraged and how the normal development of both cognitive and motor aspects of the child can come together. So this is also a fundamental part of Montessori, where we don't, for example, we don't have the typical recreation breaks like every hour and a half or something, as in traditional schools. Because for us, it's not, okay, we first focus on the intellectual part, then we get tired, we go to run for 15 minutes, we come back. So we favor more a 3-hour work cycle from 3 years old and up, where the children work the whole morning in their pace. They can make a break when they want. But we know that they can all concentrate, they can all find moments of concentration and activities of interest. They will all get engaged at a certain point in certain activities, because it's not because it's 10 o'clock that everybody needs to go out and run outside. So of course they also have this kind of, let's say, recreation breaks, but it usually happens between the work cycle of the morning and in the afternoon, either before meal or after meal. But we do really want them to work on this long hours, let's say, by letting them also control their pace of work. So another pattern is using walls and building fabric for open storage and display of learning materials. So you can see that in the Montessori, we have all of the materials in open access to the children. So it's the rooms that are not, like in many traditional places, it's either completely sterile places or there's too much primary colors and posters and like very cluttered spaces. But in our case, it's really an ordered and very well taken care of shelves that can be embedded into the walls or into the windows, with all of the materials that are organized and in open access, because we want the children to be independent. We want them to go to the material, they know where it is, it doesn't change its place from one day to the other. So of course it takes a lot of time to maintain the place, but the children also learn very quickly how to do it, how to tidy up, how to put things back. And so it becomes a really work of community. And again, when we design the place, we need to make sure that we have enough linear meters to place all of the materials and to also make it accessible in a nice way to the children. Another pattern is the meaningful access to water for children. So this is something that is always an important aspect of any Montessori environment for any age, because we know that with access to water in the classroom, the children can do so many things. They can do the cooking, the washing, the cleaning up, the experiments, the art, etc. So so we always design a place for water, or even several points for water inside and outside as well, for children to be able to use it freely. And we know that they're attracted to water, and again, provided that, like with everything else, they get trained how to use it, how not to use it, they're totally capable of using it for the good purpose. And this is sometimes really, with many projects that I have worked with, many architects don't spontaneously think of. So when you look at the first draft, the classrooms, there is never water there. Nobody will think, like, it's either in a toilet somewhere else, or so it's really something that is very typical for Montessori and very important for this approach. So another pattern is close to the example that I gave when I talk about Christopher Alexander pattern language, is this transitional space. Transitional space between inside and outside is really important for the same reason that it is important for us as adults. The children also need this transition when they go from a bigger space to the smaller, and vice versa. Creating window seats as a connection with the outside world. This is an example of an adolescent environment. Is a library in the environment with a window seat where the child can, for example, isolate himself a little bit like this, but at the same time feel that he is connected to the space that is bigger outside. Because, as I said, we have this conflicting need sometimes. We want to be inside, but also outside at the same time. So these are some of the patterns, but again, there are many more. If you're interested, you can look up at montessoriarchitecture.org. A few other things that I would like to mention between Maria Montessori and Christopher Alexander is also this 15 properties that I mentioned, how they are reflected in the Montessori materials, and also the importance of the work of the hand and in making and in manipulation. And this is something that both of them really agree on. So in Christopher Alexander approach, it's not about making drawings and then building off the drawings. It's about going there on site, walking there several days, trying to build your feeling map, then making all sorts of mock-ups with the different scales to see how it feels, trying things out. And this is pretty much how we also do in Montessori, where it's not about learning from books or pages or images. It's really by working through manipulation and through the work of the hand. And so again, in everything that we have had by now in our civilization, there was a hand involved in some time. And from the anthropological perspective and evolution, this is the hand that actually developed our intelligence. And in the young children, that's extremely important that they can manipulate things, they can work with their hands and their whole body as well to learn at the same time. So movement of the hand is not independent of, let's say, intellectual learning, cognitive development. It all comes together. Maria Montessori also wrote a very nice book about the creative development in the children, and she talks about geometry, and she also wrote another book that is called Psychogeometry, which is basically how to teach geometry with the different materials that she developed by studying Euclides, etc. And that it also has something to do with our psyche. It has something to do with our psychological perception of shapes and forms and colors. And so she was saying, we can see that geometrical relationships are not only exact, but they also bring beauty to static combinations. The art of decorative geometry comes forth through combinations of figures which are in relation to each other. These figures measured in an exact way not only appeal to the human mind, but also to man's sense of beauty. The decorative art of which geometrical figures were the basis had a great importance in the past, and it has now fallen into disuse. Why so? Very likely it is because geometry is no longer studied and geometrical figures are no longer manipulated. So she also writes that, for example, in the times of Giotto, the manual approach, the manipulation of the shapes and forms was much more current than it is now. Now it's all become very abstract. It all becomes only images and drawings, but not really manipulating of the shapes. And what we do in Montessori, we do exactly this. What Maria Montessori says is important is to manipulate different materials and shapes. I will just show it in a second. So you see here some of the examples, the materials that I have chosen to demonstrate those examples of 15 properties of the living structures that Christopher Alexander identified as important to make the object or the building come alive, and actually found that many of them are present in Montessori materials. So for example, the material on the left is the equivalence material for the geometry, where it's like metal insets, and with a button, the children can take it out and put it in and experience that for the same, like what are the equivalents between those shapes. On the right hand side is the metal insets. It's a language preparation for writing material, where they can also trace the inset, they can trace the frame, they can also combine different shapes and come up with amazing forms and shapes like the one in the middle by just using those basic shapes that are to the right. And so you can see that what children are seeing through those materials by manipulating them every day, they're exposed to those local symmetries, they see that good shape, they see those boundaries, they see the void. So they're constantly in their absorbent mind, they see those qualities of what brings life, without knowing, of course, but that's what their mind is absorbing every day. These are other examples where we can see contrasts between different shapes. I remember that the amazing comparison, for example, why we introduced the circle, the triangle, and the square to the children. Of course, we all know these are basic shapes, but also from a very, let's say, philosophical perspective, or a more scientific one. For example, the triangle is the polygon with the smallest number of sides. So we know if it's 2 sides, it's not a polygon, it's only 3 sides. And the circle is a polygon with unlimited number of sides. So, and we present those contrasts to the children when they're 3. Of course, we don't go into explanations ever, but they just touch it. They touch the shape, they take it out, they touch what is left. And so they can also experience this contrast of the shapes through their senses, because from the 0 to 6, they are sensorial explorers, and their perception of the world comes through their senses, first of all. We can also see those gradients and level of scale with the cylinder blocks, when there is this gradation either by height or by thickness, or by both of them together. And there is also this other geometric shapes that basically what you see to the left is the basic shapes, which if children combine them, they can get to the shapes that are to the right. And we don't necessarily teach them to, but we give them opportunities to discover something and then come up with their own designs by using those basic shapes. And here again, we see the contrast, the gradients, levels of scale, alternating repetition. We see the void and the boundaries that are explored. This is, for example, some of the work we do in elementary when we study the geometry. So when we want to talk about the basic trace or median or something, the different basically key centers in the triangle, we will always use some kind of decorative technique to show it. So we will implicitly demonstrate where those key centers of a shape are. And so children also learn to identify it. This is an example of a botany cabinet. So these are all the shapes that exist in the world, the shapes of leaves. As I told you, we really strive to give to the children a lot of precision and really scientific terminology, because whether it's a simple word or complex word, they absorb it with the same eagerness, let's say. And so this is also the shape that they can take out. They can touch it with their finger or with a little stick. And they can also see the simplicity of those forms. They see the inner calm, the positive space that is left when they take out the shape. They can see the boundaries. And all this material they manipulate every day. They see it in the environment. And I think it's really something that is amazing for the children to be nourished by this beauty and by these living structures in such a immersive way that I'm sure that will have an impact on them in building tomorrow the living world that we want to be in. And just to finish with a quote of Maria Montessori, only when the child is able to identify his own center with the center of the universe does education really begins. Thank you.
Wonderful. Rupali, you need to unmute.
Yes. Maria, that was amazing. Just, I love the way how you brought together both Montessori and Christopher Alexander. It's amazing how, through their work, they both arrived at the same universal principles, different times in history. But the work that, human engagement with the world, with their environment is so important for fully developed human beings. The purposeful activity that children do, that adults do, that Maria Montessori talks about, that Christopher Alexander talks about, both resulting from the richness in the environment, and both urge us to look at the environment to become the people that we're going to eventually become. The other part is from whole to parts. Maria Montessori always starts with the whole and goes to its parts. If you look at the tree, we see the whole, and then we see the leaves and the parts of it, but everything goes back to the origin, and the fractal nature of life that exists. So when you talked about scale and the patterns, you see that in nature. One of the things, the reason why Christopher Alexander's architecture works well is because that's how we perceive nature. If you go out in nature, you feel at peace because you see the big hills, and then you see the smaller, as you go down the hill, you see the slope, the scale comes down to human level when you see objects that are in size that you can relate to. I mean, I think it's just a natural way of living and being with nature. Your presentation also reminded me of the Taj Mahal, my visit to Taj Mahal, because everything, all those 15 principles that you talked about are exemplified in the design and structure of Taj Mahal. And you sit there and you can absolutely feel the sense of beauty and order and wonder, and you are still at peace in the grandiose environment of the Taj Mahal. So thank you for sharing that. Let's see, how about we take questions?
Yeah, I have a
We'll start with you.
Yeah. So this was fantastic, Maria. So the two things I really liked. Firstly, how you summarized all of Christopher Alexander's thought. I'm not that familiar with Christopher Alexander, so that was fantastic. And then how you applied that to two parts. One is the design of Montessori classrooms, and then second, the design of Montessori materials. Both the classroom and design of the classroom and design of the material are fundamental to how Montessori operates. You set the environment and make sure that the materials are correct. And so the principles that I, again, this is so beautiful because, you talked about the principle of life. And then in all these examples, when you were showing the architectural patterns, again, that term architectural patterns that this other website or organization came up with, I think is brilliant because it captures, okay, these are the principles and these are the patterns that you have to implement in this space to implement Montessori ideas. So life, that quality, the focus on emotion, that you have to kind of, you have to make sure that everything feels right. And that does so if it is kind of the holistic part. And then depending on this kind of, instead of just top-down design, looking at kind of this almost like a genetic design, that it feels right at every step. So those are the kind of things that I got from Christopher Alexander through your presentation. And then when you were talking about the Montessori classrooms, and then especially when in Montessori classrooms, it just hits you. Something as simple as water, you know, how profound it is and what it makes possible, you know, having water accessible, what it makes possible. And it connects with who we are as human beings. And the moment you see it, you say, but of course, but most people don't think of that. So the idea of that kind of identifying the patterns and then making them accessible. And the part about the Montessori materials was just beautiful because I'm very familiar with the Montessori materials, but to see the same patterns that Christopher Alexander talked about being demonstrated for it, I think was beautiful. And, you know, in anything great, there are so many levels of greatness within it, and you capture only, when you are looking at it, you capture only some things for it. And, you know, thanks to you, I think you have made alive to me, you know, several reasons why Montessori works more than what I knew. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Just to add also to this question of patterns and the wholeness, it's really important that both aspects, so the patterns themselves and the process of how create the plays are really together. Because what also Christopher Alexander noticed is that when he published his book, The Pattern Language, that some people just started, you know, picking those patterns and just thinking, okay, if I just implement this pattern, it's going to be alive, but it's not actually happening, because this underlying process of, you know, starting from the feeling, going on site, and not from a mental and intellectual perspective as a starting point, that's very different. And so it's important really to follow the whole process of the feeling map, the project language, all this testing and the making that happens as we build it up, this unfolding process, that it happens really following those principles, and then the patterns will bring it alive. But if you only take the patterns, it becomes very dry and not really happening.
I know that's very beautifully put, because what happens is that people who actually, you know, to put it in Louis Sullivan's terms, you know, forms follow function. So when these people, even when you come up with those patterns, right, those are forms that are a result of being true to the function. And then the patterns live within that function. And if you take them out, I mean, I think in modern world, we are too much focused on just replicating something, not seeing the full implication of it. Whereas what Christopher Alexander or Maria Montessori or Louis Sullivan keep on doing is that they keep going back to the source, keep focusing on this unnamed quality of the whole that you need. And you have to, unless you keep going back to the root, because that's where the life is, whatever you produce is dead. So excellent. Thank you. Go ahead.
Next up is Jyoti.
I don't have words. I cannot translate my thoughts into words to express what I felt about your presentation, Maria. And I really don't talk too much in the presentations. It was just excellent. It did take me back to kindergarten chats, Louis Sullivan, when he's telling his student, he's saying to him, don't make this building for the ornamental point of view. Think about the man inside the building who has a soul and a spirit. And that's exactly, when you were making that presentation, I'm an old soul. And I just felt that tranquility like trickling in me. It was just, I could soak everything that you were talking about in me and just sit down with a cup of tea and just relish at the thoughts. It was just beautifully done, very well explained. I mean, just a little thing like you come back from a busy street on the first floor and you don't want to go inside a busy school. It has to offer some kind of a peace. And the children come, growing up with that, and how respected, firstly, how respected they feel, that this school has been built and architected according to our needs and according to our brain, about neurology and about our soul. This is the beginning of a child's come to grips with the nature. So thank you very much. I'm going to, when the recording is finished, I'm just going to sit back again and listen to each and every word and forward it or backward it, whatever I have to do, I will do that. And I really thank you, Rupali. Now I know why I'm connected to you. I met a lot of people here, and I'm connected to Rupali because she feels the same way. She practices what she says in her school and does in her school in her internal life. So thank you again very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Jyoti. This is really, you brought up kindergarten chats. So I'm going to read a part of what Louis Sullivan says. So Louis Sullivan was an architect. He is, living in the 1800s. He knew about Maria Montessori. In fact, what he would do is to the wives of his clients, he would give them a Montessori handbook so that they could implement that at home with the children. And so he was aware of her work. He says, my object has all along been, first, to isolate the architectural art as a specialized social activity, and then to show how intricably, in its genuine state, it is interwoven with the needs, the thoughts, the aspirations of the people, that it cannot have a real life without them, and then to raise it into the higher realms of interpretation. That to become a real art of expression for us, it must be inspired by the democratic urge. It must take its vigorous origin in the direct practical utilitarian needs, must avail itself of all modern resources. It must first fully satisfy the needs, fully utilize the resources. Then and then only is it justified in entering the realms of sentiment and poetic imagination, and then only for the purpose of giving to the utilitarian its needed aspect of beauty, thus contributing its share to happiness of mankind, to the poem of democracy. Then and only then may architecture worthily be called the art of expression. And he goes on to urge designers, all geometric forms are at your disposal. They are universal. It is for you to utilize them, to manipulate them, to transmute them with feeling and intelligence. Engineering science has substantially solved all problems of construction. The industrial arts, the so-called fine arts, mechanical skill, craftsmanship are at your disposal. The organized building arts, transportation, communication are at your disposal. Language is at your disposal. Nature's manifold expressions of function and form are at your disposal. What more do you need as a medium of expression? The rest is up to you.
Thank you.
It's,
Wow.
yeah.
All right. So this is wonderful. And Maria, I would love for you to come back and talk about that topic about how Montessori applies to later years. So would love to have you come back. So any thoughts, Maria? Any closing thoughts?
Well, thank you very much again, everyone, for having me here. And it was really a pleasure, and I'm very happy to be able to share all this, and hopefully even more people will get to know Montessori, will get to know Christopher, Alexander, and got also excited about the depth of their work and the impact it has on our society and ourselves. So thank you very much, and I will be happy to be back.
Wonderful. Rupali, any closing thoughts?
Well, I just feel that when we go back to the roots, we always design from the first principles, and both Maria Montessori and Christopher Alexander exemplify this principle through all the work that they've done. So Maria, thank you again, and I look forward to working with you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shrikant, for this opportunity.
Absolutely.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.